Imagine uncovering the most groundbreaking astronomical discovery of the 20th century. You are merely 24 years old, a graduate student sifting through literal miles of raw data, and you find a completely new celestial object. It is something that fundamentally reshapes our understanding of the cosmos, of gravity, and the entire life cycle of stars. And your ultimate reward? To stand silently in the shadows and watch your male supervisor accept the Nobel Prize for your work. But the sheer indignity of this situation goes so much further than stolen academic credit. While your supervisor fields serious, high-level questions from the global press about the profound implications for theoretical astrophysics, the journalists turn to you, the actual discoverer. They do not ask about your methodology. Instead, they demand your vital statistics. They ask whether you prefer to be called a brunette or a blonde, and they inquire deeply about your romantic life. And then, the photographers explicitly instruct you to unbutton your blouse, just to get a more appealing shot for the morning papers. This is not some heavy-handed dystopian fiction. It is the brutal, sickening historical reality faced by Dame Jocelyn Bell Burnell. Welcome to Legendary Lives Unveiled. If you are drawn to the hidden truths of history's greatest minds, leave a like, share this story, and subscribe to our channel. Today, we dissect the anatomy of a 20th century scientific scandal, the story of an incredible underdog from Northern Ireland who survived extreme institutional gatekeeping and crippling imposter syndrome to transform the landscape of modern physics. To comprehend the impenetrable armor she had to build just to survive the hostile, elite world of 1960s Cambridge, we must first look at the systemic walls built to keep her out before she even reached adolescence. Susan Jocelyn Bell was born in 1943 in Belfast, Northern Ireland. She grew up in a country home bearing the somewhat poetic name Solitude, located in County Armagh. Her father, Philip Bell, was an architect who helped design the nearby Armagh Planetarium. Raised by highly educated Quakers, she was given free rein in her father's extensive library, devouring heavy academic texts like Fred Hoyle's Frontiers of Astronomy, long before she even possessed the mathematical vocabulary to fully process the equations. Yet, the establishment's first official evaluation of her intellect was a devastating failure. At the age of 11, Jocelyn Bell took the 11+ exam, and she completely failed. In the UK during the 1950s, this test was a ruthless, life-defining sorting hat. It determined whether children were intellectually ready for grammar schools and university, or if they should be filtered out into secondary modern schools geared almost entirely toward vocational training and manual labor. Failing effectively meant the state had evaluated her brain and decided she was simply not university material. Why? Because the exam rewarded rapid recall, rote memorization, and compliance with rigid formatting. It was notoriously terrible at capturing deep analytical observation, patience, or lateral thinking. Jocelyn possessed a mind built to look for patterns and anomalies over long periods, not one that instantly regurgitated isolated facts. Her failure was her first confrontation with a system fundamentally blind to her actual capabilities. This blindness extended to what she was even allowed to learn. When she attended the preparatory department at Lurgan College, she hit a wall of blatant codified sexism. The curriculum was strictly divided by gender. The boys were shuttled off to the laboratories to study technical subjects like chemistry and physics. The girls were completely barred from those rooms. The future discoverer of pulsars was literally forced to sit in a room and practice cooking and cross-stitching. The educational establishment operated on the deeply ingrained assumption that the female brain was neither suited for nor required rigorous scientific training. But this is where the profound cultural influence of her Quaker upbringing became the defining force in her trajectory. Rooted in a belief in fundamental equality and a quiet, unyielding persistence in the face of injustice, her parents organized alongside a few other concerned local families to stage a protest. They politely but stubbornly badgered the administration, refusing to drop the issue until the school finally capitulated. They allowed Jocelyn and 2 other girls to cross the threshold into the science classroom. It taught her a foundational lesson. The laws of nature are absolute, but the rules of an institution are entirely manufactured. and they can be challenged. Moving to the Mount School, a Quaker girls' boarding school in York, her intellectual paradigm shifted entirely, largely thanks to a physics teacher named Mr. Tillett. Instead of teaching physics as disconnected facts to be memorized for an exam, Mr. Tillett focused strictly on fundamental principles. He taught her that if you deeply understand the core mechanics of a physical system, you can deduce any outcome. This validated her natural way of thinking. It became her psychological armor. She realized her brain wasn't flawed. The previous testing mechanism was simply the wrong tool to measure it. She would desperately need that armor. In 1961, she enrolled at the University of Glasgow to study natural philosophy. The environment was aggressively toxic. She was the singular, solitary woman in her honors physics class of 50 men. Every single time she crossed the threshold into the lecture hall, those 50 men would whistle, stamp their feet, and catcall her. It was highly calibrated psychological warfare. The men watched her closely for any sign of weakness. If she showed a visible reaction, broke eye contact, or particularly if she blushed, the noise and stamping would dramatically escalate. It was the most transparent gatekeeping tactic imaginable. Make the outsider so viscerally uncomfortable, they self-select out of the group. She denied them any satisfaction at all. She trained herself to suppress her blushing, maintain an absolute, unreadable stone face, walk to her seat in silence, and focus entirely on the work. She graduated with honors in 1965, but surviving Glasgow merely provided her the credentials to enter an even more intimidating, elite level of the scientific establishment, the University of Cambridge, where she arrived to begin her Ph.D. in radio astronomy. The cultural whiplash must have been severe. She transitioned from overt, loud sexism to polite, deeply entrenched elitism. She looked around at a sea of incredibly wealthy, fiercely confident Southern English students who seemed to carry centuries of aristocratic entitlement in their posture. As a Northern Irish Quaker woman with a regional accent navigating a heavily Anglican male domain, she described the sensation as feeling like a freak from outer space, or a bumpkin who had just wandered in from the sticks. She suffered from acute, paralyzing imposter syndrome. She was entirely convinced the admissions office had made a clerical error, living in a state of daily dread, expecting a university official with a clipboard to tap her on the shoulder and escort her off the premises. Her psychological defense was brilliant, albeit tragic. She reasoned her expulsion was inevitable, but until that moment arrived, she decided she would work herself to the absolute bone. When she was finally standing on the street with her bags packed, she would have a clear conscience, a preemptive strike against future regret. This obsessive work ethic was immediately demanded of her. Joining the radio astronomy faculty under her advisor, Anthony Hewish, was not some glamorous theoretical pursuit. He didn't hand her a textbook. He handed her heavy-duty wire working tools, pliers, wire cutters, and literal sledgehammers. Hewish had secured funding to build the Interplanetary Scintillation Array, a massive radio telescope designed to hunt for quasars. But the funding covered only raw materials, not a professional construction crew. The graduate students were the manual labor. For 2 entire years, Jocelyn worked through the bitter, damp British winters in the freezing Cambridge mud. The telescope's footprint covered 4.5 acres, an area equivalent to 57 tennis courts. Covering that land required stringing 120 miles of wire and cable. Jocelyn personally outfitted the cables, sitting in unheated makeshift wooden huts, meticulously soldering copper wires, while the freezing wind constantly dropped the temperature of her iron. She swung sledgehammers to drive in over 1,000 wooden posts, stringing 2,000 dipole antennas. The wooden posts were a scientific necessity. If the conductive wires sagged and touched the wet grass, the faint electrical signals from the distant cosmos would instantly ground out into the earth and be lost forever. Through this back-breaking apprenticeship, she forged an absolute intimacy with the machinery. When the telescope was finally switched on in July 1967, the physical exhaustion was replaced by an unprecedented mental marathon. The telescope output data to paper using mechanical pen recorders. It produced 100 feet, about 30 meters, of chart paper every single day. Every 4 days, Jocelyn had 400 feet of paper to analyze. Over her initial 6-month observation period, she manually analyzed over 3 miles, roughly 5 kilometers, of these chart recordings. Relying solely on human visual pattern recognition, she had to instantly differentiate between cosmic signals and terrestrial noise. She was looking for the visual signature of a quasar, scintillation caused by radio waves passing through the turbulent plasma of the solar wind, twinkling like a bright penny resting at the bottom of a rippling swimming pool. She had to separate this from the sharp, violent spikes of a badly suppressed car engine driving down a country road, sparking power lines, or illegal French television broadcasts bouncing off the atmosphere. And then, buried in this unimaginably monotonous mountain of data, she spotted a tiny anomaly, about 1/4 of an inch or 5 millimeters of unusual movement. She categorized it in her notes with a highly informal phrase, a bit of scruff. It did not look like a quasar, nor did it look like the upward-pointing spikes typical of local interference. The frequency and amplitude were fundamentally different. She brought it to her advisor, Anthony Hewish, who confidently declared it was merely man-made interference, even suggesting she had wired the telescope incorrectly. Statistically, he was logical. 99.9% of unexplained anomalies were human interference. But Hewish had not built the telescope wire by wire, nor had he spent hundreds of hours staring at the microscopic differences in the ink. Jocelyn stubbornly persisted, arguing until Hewish allowed her to run a high-speed recorder to spread the signal out and reveal its true internal structure. But to run it, she had to manually flip a switch at the exact moment the coordinates aligned. For an entire month, she went out to the freezing observatory every day, engaged the recorder, and captured nothing but ambient static. Hewish was absolutely livid, insisting it was just a flare star and accusing her of wasting the department's time. Then, on November 28, 1967, she finally caught it. The mechanical pen began to violently trace a distinct pattern. Bump, bump, bump. It was a rhythmic pulse firing exactly every 337 seconds, keeping a beat more accurately than almost any mechanical clock on Earth. There was no known physical mechanism in astrophysics at the time that could explain a natural object emitting radio waves with that level of extreme precision. Because physics couldn't explain it, these rational Cambridge physicists, playfully, yet very nervously, named the signal LGM1, Little Green Men. They locked the laboratory doors and deeply classified the entire process. They ran mathematical tests by hand, calculating the Doppler shift to find the orbital velocity and planetary mass of an imaginary alien homeworld. Sir Fred Hoyle later noted, they were operating exactly like a wartime intelligence unit, intercepting an encrypted enemy broadcast. The geopolitical and theological panic of confirming extraterrestrial intelligence was simply too massive to handle without absolute certainty. How did she definitively prove it wasn't a local worker driving a car and not aliens? She used sidereal time. While a normal solar day requires a 24-hour rotation, the Earth only needs to spin 23 hours and 56 minutes to face the exact same distant star. Jocelyn noticed her bit of scruff was arriving exactly 4 minutes earlier every single day. Over a month, it arrived 2 full hours earlier. A local pub worker doesn't drive home 4 minutes earlier every day for months on end. The signal was definitively locked to the rotation of the distant stars. It was undeniably cosmic. She definitively ruled out the Little Green Men by finding LGM2 just before Christmas in 1967, working late at 2 a.m. and locked inside the lab because she wasn't trusted with keys to the building. She caught the scruff again. She went out to the freezing telescope, literally breathed hot air onto the equipment to thaw it out, and recorded a second pulsing signal firing every 25 seconds. Over the next few weeks, she found a third and a fourth in entirely different regions of the galaxy. It was statistically impossible that 4 separate, unrelated alien civilizations simultaneously started beaming radio pulses at Earth at the exact same microsecond of cosmic history. Jocelyn Bell Burnell had discovered a completely new class of celestial body, rapidly spinning neutron stars, which the press would rapidly dub pulsars. In February 1968, They published their findings in the highly prestigious scientific journal, Nature. Anthony Hewish was listed as the first author, and Jocelyn Bell was listed second. The publication caused an absolute media frenzy, but the journalists who flooded the Cavendish laboratory did not treat her as a brilliant pioneer. They asked Hewish deeply complex theoretical questions about extreme gravitational fields and Einstein's general theory of relativity. Then, having fulfilled their quota for science, they turned to Jocelyn for explicitly named human interest. They demanded her chest, waist, and hip measurements. They asked her to unbutton her blouse. She handled it with gritted teeth and a profound calculating pragmatism, knowing that as a vulnerable graduate student, storming out would instantly label her a hysterical woman and drum her out of academia forever. She swallowed her pride to survive the profession she was actively revolutionizing. But this localized bigotry of the tabloid press was merely the warm-up act for the devastating institutional betrayal that was about to rock the entire scientific world. In 1974, the ultimate scientific slap in the face occurred. The Nobel Prize in Physics, the very first ever awarded for observational astronomy, was given specifically for the discovery of pulsars. The laureates named were Anthony Hewish and his boss, Martin Ryle. Jocelyn Bell Burnell was entirely omitted from the award. This glaring omission erupted into a massive, highly public scandal, sending immediate shockwaves through the global scientific community. The charge to defend her honor was led by Sir Fred Hoyle, an absolute titan of 20th century astronomy. Hoyle was a heavyweight, the scientist who actually coined the term Big Bang, ironically, as a sarcastic insult, because he vehemently defended the competing steady-state theory of the universe. Known for being fiercely combative, Hoyle went ballistic. He convened a press conference in Montreal, where he essentially accused Anthony Hewish of intellectual theft. He publicly theorized that Hewish and Ryle had kept the discovery secret for 6 months, not just to verify data, but because they were deliberately pinching it from a girl. Hoyle then escalated the war. He wrote an explosive open letter to the Times of London, viciously criticizing the toxic, credit-stealing culture of the Cavendish laboratory. He forcefully argued that securing funding and managing administrative duties is not the equivalent of making the conceptual, observational leap of discovery. Women in science across the globe used her omission as a rallying cry against the patriarchy. The entire scientific world was fighting this battle on her behalf. And what did Jocelyn do? She stepped up to a microphone and agreed with the Nobel Committee. She publicly defended the very men who excluded her. She stated that Nobel Prizes should not go to graduate students for what she termed flash-in-the-pan observations. She argued that since the supervisor takes the financial and professional risk of building the lab, the supervisor should take the reward. It seemed incomprehensible. Was she suffering from internalized sexism? A form of Stockholm Syndrome for physicists? No, it was a profoundly brilliant, meticulously calculated strategy of survival. Jocelyn was the ultimate pragmatist. She knew that if she joined Hoyle's crusade and complained bitterly about her supervisor to the press, she would be permanently labeled a troublemaking subordinate. In the tight-knit, heavily male boys' club of 1970s British physics, that reputation was immediate professional suicide. She chose survival over ego, but she actively validated the committee because of a much deeper sociological observation. She recognized the Nobel curse. When scientists win a Nobel Prize, particularly at a young age, their lives as working observational researchers are effectively destroyed. You cease to be a scientist and become a figurehead. You are hounded by the press, asked to comment on every political and economic subject, as if winning a prize in radio astronomy makes you an oracle on global trade policy. You spend the rest of your career attending galas and cutting ribbons. By not winning the prize, she pulled off an incredible sociological maneuver. She maintained the absolute quiet respect of her peers, who all knew the truth. She became a global martyr for women in STEM, granting her immense moral authority. And most importantly, she actually got to live a productive, happy life, doing the grueling, hands-on grunt work of observational science that she genuinely loved. She essentially let Anthony Hewish take the cursed shiny medal so she could be left alone in the dark to play with the telescopes. But we must be careful not to romanticize the era. Her struggles with the patriarchal establishment were far from over. In 1968, right in the middle of analyzing the data and finding the second and third pulsars, she got engaged to Martin Burnell. She walked into the Cavendish laboratory wearing her new ring, only to be met with crushing societal stigma. In 1960s Britain, a married woman was strictly expected to quit her job and become a full-time housewife. If she continued to work, it was not viewed as an act of empowerment. It was considered socially shameful because it heavily implied her husband was a failure who could not provide. Because she married Martin, a local government officer forced to relocate around the UK every few years, Jocelyn was forced to become what she termed peripatetic, an academic nomad. For 18 years, she subordinated her career to follow his geographic trajectory. Unable to secure tenure or build a stable lab, she took whatever junior, part-time, or administrative roles she could find. She became the ultimate scientific patchwork quilt, moving from radio astronomy to X-ray astronomy at the University of Southampton, pivoting to gamma-ray astronomy, and later to infrared astronomy in Edinburgh. She was constantly rebuilding her expertise from scratch across 4 entirely different spectrums of astrophysics. All the while, she raised her son, Gavin, who was diagnosed with juvenile diabetes, a condition demanding immense parental monitoring, strict dietary care, and scheduled insulin injections. Burdened by these overwhelming pressures, her marriage eventually ended in divorce in 1989. Her trajectory perfectly illustrates the leaky pipeline in STEM fields, where brilliant women are forced to sideline their research to accommodate their husbands and childcare. But rather than letting this fractured career defeat her, she utilized her struggles to change the very architecture of the system. In 2005, she became a foundational driving force in establishing the Athena Swan Charter. It is a rigorous evaluation framework, now utilized globally, to transform gender equality within higher education. The psychology behind how her team enforced compliance is nothing short of masterful. They realized that university vice-chancellors were almost exclusively middle-aged men with massive egos, fiercely competitive with one another. So, Jocelyn's team didn't appeal to their morals. They created a competition. They weaponized male competitiveness to dismantle patriarchal structures. They handed out bronze, silver, and gold awards for the most women-friendly universities. Watching these chancellors fight tooth and nail for the prestige of a plaque on their letterhead, once major government funding bodies tied massive, multi-million-pound research grants explicitly to holding a silver or gold Athena Swan Award. It forced immediate, undeniable, systemic change from the top down. If Athena Swan was her structural revenge, 2018 brought the ultimate monetary mic drop. 50 years after discovering pulsars, she was awarded the Special Breakthrough Prize in Fundamental Physics. Funded by Silicon Valley billionaires, this was no mere academic plaque. She was handed $3 million, completely tax-free. She did not keep a single penny. She donated all $3 million directly to the Institute of Physics to create the Bell Burnell Graduate Scholarship Fund. The criteria were highly specific. The money does not go to straight A, legacy students from Oxford and Cambridge who have had a smooth path. It specifically funds PhD, research for women, underrepresented ethnic minorities, and refugee students. She weaponized her own Nobel snub. She took the massive financial reward that recognized her outsider discovery and permanently bankrolled future outsiders. Her reasoning was a scientifically grounded argument. If you populate a laboratory exclusively with identical wealthy men who were taught the same theories, they will all look at the same data and ignore the exact same anomalies. You need the bumpkin from Northern Ireland, the refugee, the woman, to look at the chart paper and say, wait, that's not a car engine, that's a star. Diversity is not a social nicety. It is a rigorous scientific necessity. Yet, to fully appreciate the entirety of Jocelyn Bell Burnell, we must recognize that her connection to the universe was grounded in the extreme, violent physical mechanics of the cosmos. The mechanics of a neutron star defy earthly logic. When a massive supergiant star runs out of nuclear fuel, gravity wins. The star collapses inward violently, triggering a supernova explosion. In the dead core that remains, The gravity is so overwhelmingly powerful that it breaks the fundamental rules of chemistry. It overcomes a quantum mechanical rule known as electron degeneracy pressure. It physically crushes the negatively charged electrons into the positively charged protons, fusing them together to create a solid sphere of neutrally charged neutrons. Imagine taking the entire mass of our sun and crushing it down to a sphere the size of a small city with a radius of roughly 10 kilometers. You could drop a pulsar onto the city of Toronto, and it would easily fit within the city limits. The density is unimaginable. If you filled a standard sewing thimble with this neutron material, that single tiny thimbleful would weigh roughly 1 billion tons. It would weigh as much as the entire 8 billion human population of Earth, crushed onto a piece of silver on your finger. The gravitational pull on the surface is hundreds of billions of times stronger than Earth's. It warps space-time severely enough to bend light entirely around the star. If you stood on the surface, you could look straight ahead and see the back of your own head. As the collapsing star shrinks, it spins faster, rotating hundreds of times per second. Massive magnetic fields channel electromagnetic radiation out of its poles, sweeping across the cosmos like the beam of a lighthouse. That violent, cold, mathematically brutal beam was the exact bump Jocelyn recorded on her chart paper. This brings us to one of the most fascinating paradoxes of her life. Jocelyn Bell Burnell remained an active, devout Quaker her entire life. How does someone who calculates the crushing mechanics of electron degeneracy pressure still pray? She reconciled this beautifully in her Swarthmore lecture, Broken for Life, and her James Backhouse lecture, A Quaker Astronomer Reflects. She famously refers to God as a working hypothesis, the most wonderfully physicist way to describe theology imaginable. To her, science exists to answer the how stars collapse, how gravity warps space-time. Religion and philosophy answer the why. Why is there a universe? And what is our moral obligation within it? A creator who could engineer the physics required to spin a neutron star is infinitely more majestic than any small, human-centric deity. To truly process this scale, mathematics is insufficient. You need human language, emotion, and art. This is why she became a dedicated collector of astronomical poetry, co-editing the beautiful anthology, Dark Matter, Poems of Space. A high-speed chart recorder can tell you the precise rotational period of a pulsar down to the millisecond, but only a poet can adequately express what it feels like to stand in the freezing mud in the dark, realizing you are listening to the heartbeat of a dead star. She contains multitudes. A world-class astronomer, a devout Quaker, a relentless activist, an academic nomad, and a lover of poetry. Think back to that tiny quarter-inch squiggle on a 3-mile roll of chart paper. Jocelyn noticed it and fought her supervisor to investigate it, specifically because she suffered from imposter syndrome. She felt she had to analyze every single millimeter of data just to justify her fundamental right to be in the room. It is a profound, uncomfortable paradox that the feeling of not belonging is precisely what allowed her to see what those who belonged missed. It leaves us with a vital question for our own modern institutions today. What other universe-altering discoveries are we currently missing? What faint, crucial signals are slipping by simply because the people in charge feel too comfortable, too entitled, and too sure of their own expertise to notice the anomalies? Certainty is often the enemy of discovery. If you enjoyed exploring this incredible story with us, please like, share, and subscribe to Legendary Lives Unveiled. Leave a comment below, letting us know what part of Jocelyn's journey surprised you the most. Was it the bizarre logic of the 11+ exam? The terrifying mathematical pursuit of the little green men? Or her brilliant $3 million revenge? Join us next time as we continue to look into the untold, complex stories of history's greatest minds.